What if everything you were taught in Sunday school only scratched the surface of who Jesus truly was? What if the man called the Christ lived not just once, but many times before his birth in Bethlehem? According to the readings of Edgar Cayce, often called the sleeping prophet, Jesus was far more than a singular figure of divine intervention. He was the result of a long spiritual journey, a soul who willingly descended through time and space to fulfill a divine mission. And Cayce didn't make these statements casually. He gave hundreds of trance readings on the soul's evolution, the nature of the Christ, and the hidden spiritual history of the world, all while under self-induced hypnosis. This is not a story about religion, nor an attempt to disprove faith. It is instead a deeper look into the mystic's view of Jesus, one that blends ancient wisdom, reincarnation, and divine consciousness into a single, awe-inspiring narrative. And what Cayce revealed, quite frankly, goes against nearly everything most of us learned in church. Before we begin, remember to subscribe and stay with us until the end as we uncover Cayce's most powerful and controversial insights about Jesus. Insights that might just transform how you see yourself and the divine spark within you. Let us begin not in Bethlehem, but in the very beginning, before the earth was formed, when souls still moved as pure light in the celestial realms. In reading 5749-14, Cayce described Jesus as the soul known as Amelius, a spiritual being who existed long before physical incarnation began. This Amelius was the first to fully embody the divine ideal of oneness with the Creator. In the early soul realm, sometimes referred to as the spirit plane or the dimension of pure thought, Amelius saw that many souls were becoming trapped in material desire. They were forgetting their source. Amelius, according to Cayce, chose to enter into the cycles of earth in order to guide humanity back to the light. This soul became the pattern for what later came to be known as the Christ consciousness. But the descent into matter was not simple. Cayce explained that when souls first entered the earth plane, they began to take on physical form, slowly losing memory of their divine origins. And Amelius was no exception. In time, even this exalted soul would pass through lifetimes of trial, purification, and refinement. The journey of Jesus, then, was not a one-time event, but a series of incarnations through which the soul grew, remembered, and finally fulfilled its mission. In reading 364-7, Cayce stated plainly that the first begotten of the Father was indeed Amelius, who later would become Jesus. This soul, he said, entered into many incarnations to become the way, the truth, and the life. And it is from here, the soul's long walk through history, that the real story of Jesus begins. According to Edgar Cayce's readings, Jesus, or the soul that would become Jesus, took on several incarnations before his final appearance in Galilee. These were not ordinary lifetimes, but purposeful steps in soul evolution, each with profound spiritual impact. Cayce never claimed Jesus sinned in the traditional sense, but he did suggest that these incarnations were necessary for refining the soul's connection to divine will. One of the most striking claims appears in reading 364-1, where Cayce identifies several of these earlier incarnations, among them Adam, Enoch, Melchizedek, Joseph, and Zerubbabel. Each figure, Cayce said, was a manifestation of the same soul working through different phases of human development, a divine consciousness slowly preparing for the final incarnation as Jesus of Nazareth. Let's pause here. Consider the weight of this idea. In the Bible, these figures are separated by centuries, cultures, and roles. Adam, the first man. Enoch, the mystic who walked with God. Melchizedek, the priest-king of Salem. Joseph, the dream interpreter who saved Egypt. Zerubbabel, the rebuilder of the temple. According to Cayce, all of these were not just spiritually aligned, but literally the same soul, making its way through the ages, building toward something extraordinary. This concept reframes everything. Jesus didn't simply arrive perfect. He evolved, spiritually, consciously, through the very human process of incarnation. And yet, Cayce was clear. This soul remained connected to divine purpose throughout. In reading 5749-5, he stated that Jesus was the only soul that kept his relationship with God so pure through all incarnations that he became the pattern for man's return to the Creator. That phrase, the pattern, appears repeatedly in Cayce's work. Jesus wasn't just a savior to be worshipped, but a template to be studied. His journey was meant to reflect our own potential. In that sense, the mission of Christ was not to condemn, but to awaken. Even more controversial is Cayce's assertion that Jesus' soul learned through suffering. In reading 2067-7, he explained that the Master learned obedience through the things which he suffered in the flesh. This echoes Hebrews 5:8 in the Bible, but Cayce expands on it, suggesting that suffering was not punishment, but initiation, a process by which the soul tempered its ego, aligned with divine law, and prepared to embody the Christ fully. And this brings us to an uncomfortable yet powerful idea. The Jesus of Cayce's vision is not unreachable, not some impossibly perfect being. He is a perfected soul, yes, but one that rose from within the same cosmic pattern that we all share. His greatness was not given. It was earned across lifetimes of conscious alignment with divine will. Cayce didn't deify Jesus in the traditional church sense. He clarified his divine mission, not as a miraculous exception to the human story, but as its ultimate fulfillment. What happened to Jesus between the ages of 12 and 30, those so-called missing years, has long been a source of speculation. The Bible is largely silent on this period, but Edgar Cayce's readings offer a compelling narrative. Far from being idle, Jesus was undergoing spiritual training across distant lands, deepening his mastery over the physical and spiritual laws that would define his ministry. In reading 5749-2, Cayce states that Jesus traveled through Persia, India, and Egypt, absorbing the sacred teachings of each region. He studied with spiritual masters, delving into the mysteries of reincarnation, healing, meditation, and divine unity. This wasn't about accumulating exotic knowledge. It was preparation, a deliberate spiritual initiation meant to awaken the full expression of the Christ consciousness within him. According to Cayce, this journey was part of a larger plan to harmonize the truths of all world religions, not just Judaism. He wasn't rejecting the Hebrew tradition, but rather fulfilling and expanding it. In reading 1158-12, Cayce describes Jesus as one who studied the teachings of many lands so that he might understand the full measure of man's seeking. One of the most significant places Jesus visited, according to Cayce, was the Great Pyramid of Giza. Far from being merely a tomb, the pyramid was seen as a temple of initiation, a kind of spiritual tuning fork for the soul. Cayce claimed in reading 5748-5 that Jesus entered the Great Pyramid as part of his mystical preparation, undergoing initiations that aligned his physical body and spirit for the mission ahead. He described these rituals as essential to awakening higher faculties of consciousness, designed long ago by initiates who foresaw the coming of the Messiah. Cayce also referenced the Essenes, a mystical Jewish sect known for their ascetic lifestyle and apocalyptic prophecies, as crucial mentors to Jesus. In reading 1472-3, he explains that the Essenes helped prepare Mary, the mother of Jesus, from a young age for her divine role, and later guided Jesus himself in his early spiritual development. The Essenes believed in purity, karma, and the soul's eternal journey. Their teachings aligned with Cayce's vision of a Jesus shaped by universal truth, not institutional religion. This perspective reframes Jesus as a spiritual synthesizer, someone who absorbed wisdom from many ancient traditions to reveal the eternal truth behind them all. His teachings were not born in isolation, but emerged from a global journey of spiritual initiation designed to demonstrate how divine awareness could be made manifest in human form. It also reveals why his message was so radical, not because it was new, but because it remembered something ancient, something humanity had forgotten. So when Jesus returned to Galilee, he was no longer just a carpenter's son. He was the embodiment of a cosmic principle, the Christ, fully awakened, ready to spark the divine remembrance in others. In reading 2067-7, Cayce explained that the man Jesus became the Christ, emphasizing that Jesus was a soul who had undergone many lifetimes of refinement before fully merging with the divine essence. To Cayce, Jesus was the first soul to complete the full cycle of earthly incarnations and return to God in total unity. He referred to Jesus as the elder brother, a guide who walked the path before us, showing humanity what is possible when one fully awakens the divine within. This didn't make Jesus less divine in Cayce's view. It made him even more extraordinary because he achieved divinity through effort, love, and alignment over many lifetimes. In reading 378-13, Cayce noted that the Christ consciousness is the awareness within each soul of the indwelling of the Father. It is not unique to Jesus, but he became the ultimate example of living in complete harmony with it. This was the pattern, the sacred template Jesus came to offer the world, and it was open to every soul, not just a chosen few. Jesus' miracles, Cayce said, were not performed to impress or prove anything. Rather, they were natural expressions of spiritual law, flowing from his complete alignment with divine truth. In reading 1877-1, Cayce remarked that these acts were manifestations of the Spirit within, made possible through perfect attunement. Healing, walking on water, even raising the dead, all of it was the outflow of a consciousness no longer bound by illusion or fear. One of the more surprising elements in Cayce's readings is the notion that the Christ is a universal force, not tied to any single religion. In reading 2533-7, he said, "The Christ Spirit is universal and personal. It may be awakened in all." This means the message of Jesus was not about establishing dogma, but about awakening a sleeping memory within each of us, the memory of our divine origin. And perhaps most radically, Cayce taught that each soul is a co-creator with God. Jesus simply remembered this first. His life became the model for how to return to that awareness, how to overcome karma, and how to transform the world from the inside out. To the Church, this was a dangerous idea. If every soul had the same potential for divine realization, then power structures built on exclusivity would eventually collapse. Cayce was not trying to start a new religion, but to remind us that the sacred lives within, not just in temples or books, but in the silence of our own hearts. What Jesus showed was not unreachable. It was the road home, walked in humility, service, and unwavering love. What Edgar Cayce offered was not a condemnation of the Church, but a challenge. A gentle but firm call to remember what the teachings of Jesus were really about. Not fear, not control, not blind obedience to external authorities, but awakening, transformation, unity with the divine. Through hundreds of readings, Cayce revealed a Jesus who was not just the object of worship, but the living blueprint of what each soul can become. He taught that Jesus did not demand worship, but invited participation. That salvation was not a legal transaction, but a journey, a remembering of our soul's true identity. In reading 1158-12, Cayce said, "Know that thy soul existed before it entered this experience, and that it may become aware of its oneness with Him." These were not just words meant to comfort, but to awaken a sleeping potential within every listener, a divine echo waiting to be heard again. Cayce never claimed to replace Scripture, nor to rewrite the Gospels, but he insisted that the deeper meanings were often buried beneath centuries of fear-based theology and human politics. The Christ he spoke of was not a judge, but a healer, not a gatekeeper, but a guide. And if his vision was true, then it means something profound, that we are not here to merely worship miracles from the past, but to live them in the present. That Jesus did not come to close a door, but to open one, a door that leads not to separation, but to divine remembrance. So why did Cayce's Jesus go against what so many churches have taught? Because institutional power often finds it easier to teach obedience than awakening. Because mystery cannot be controlled. And because the moment you realize that the Christ is not confined to one man or one building, the world begins to shift. This message is not easy. It asks more of us than passive belief. It asks us to look within, to do the soul work, to forgive, to serve, to heal, and ultimately, to become. And perhaps that is why Cayce's readings still speak to so many seekers today. They don't offer easy answers. They don't promise rewards for the faithful or punishment for the doubters. Instead, they invite each soul into a dialogue with the divine, one that began before birth and will continue long after death. In the end, Cayce's vision of Jesus may not fit comfortably inside the walls of a church, but it lives where it always has, in the heart, in the light, and in the quiet places where the soul remembers who it is. And that perhaps is the greatest teaching of all.